Well, hello there, Internet. It's time once again for me to talk about the end times. So buckle up. We're going to talk about the Antichrist this week. Actually, this one's been rattling around in my brain for a while now. It all started about 2 months ago when Casey Hill posted an article called Speculative Antichrist. The link to it is right down there. Anyway, in this article, Casey made a list of the top 50 things she would not do if she turned out to be the Antichrist. And it was a fairly funny list. For example, if two prophets of the Judeo-Christian God show up, I will invite them to dinner. If said two prophets turn out to be two prophets centuries dead, I will assume I should consider carefully before angering them. Number 22, I will not form a 7-year treaty with Israel only to break it halfway through. That's likely to tip someone off. I will instead remain bound to my contract for the entire 7 years. Now, like I said, I found this list hilarious personally, but then one of our commentators, Galadriel, had this question for her. But following this list seems to prevent one from being the Antichrist. And then I butted my amillennialist nose into it and said that's only assuming that the dispensational premillennial version of the Antichrist is the correct one. If it's not, then this list fits quite well. This is actually what got me started thinking about possibly doing a video series about what amillennialists believe about the end times. So, Galadriel, this is all your fault. Anyway, let's talk about the Antichrist. That's a rather contentious subject because, again, the dispensational premillennialists are the vocal minority on this point. They're the ones that make the most noise, and because of that, that's what a lot of people assume the Antichrist is going to be. He's going to be a charismatic, charming politician who will take the world by storm, not through violence, but by preaching a message of peace. He'll then follow a script that people have pieced together from Revelation and the book of Daniel and a bunch of other places, following a script where he first makes a peace treaty with Israel only to break it halfway through and then declare himself to be divine from within the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem before he really goes off his nut and starts cutting people's heads off because they happen to be Christian. It's a fairly detailed script. One that, like I said, Casey lampooned quite nicely in her post. But my question is this: is that really what the Antichrist is going to be like? Most amillennialists would say no. And here is the reason why. We have to take a very close look at what the Bible actually says about the Antichrist. Now, having done a careful word study, I've discovered the word Antichrist shows up 4 times in the Bible. And it shows up in 1 John chapter 2, 1 John chapter 4, and 2 John chapter 1. In 1 John 2, verse 18, it says, Dear children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it is the last hour. And who is the liar? It is whoever denies that Jesus is the Christ. Such a person is the Antichrist, denying the Father and the Son. Then in 1 John chapter 4, verse 3, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and even now is already in the world. And then 2 John 1, verse 7, I say this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. If you think about it, those 4 verses are the clearest description we have of the Antichrist, an undeniable description of the Antichrist. The details are a little thin, aren't they? And so people go casting about in the Bible to try to find more information about the Antichrist. One of the places that they go is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where St. Paul talks about the man of lawlessness, where he writes this, Concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we ask you, brothers and sisters, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by the teaching allegedly from us. whether by a prophecy or by word of mouth or by letter, asserting that the day of the Lord has already come. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Don't you remember that when I was with you I used to tell you these things? And now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth, and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie, and all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. There you go. More details emerge about the Antichrist, but we're going to come back to this in just a little bit. For now, we'll just say this. The details seem to be that he will deceive many, that he will perform counterfeit signs, that he will set himself up in God's temple, whatever that means. We'll maybe talk about that for a little bit too. That the power of lawlessness was already at work in Paul's day, and that something was holding it back, which is a little bit fleshes out the picture of the Antichrist a little bit more. And then to find more details, they go casting around in the book of Revelation, but there's a problem there. And the problem is remember, how many times does the Bible use the word Antichrist? 4. It never appears in the book of Revelation, which means that people have to guess. Is this person, is this figure, is this image referring to the Antichrist? And from where I'm sitting, most of the time they get it wrong. I'll give you an example. One of the most popular things that I've seen as a picture of the Antichrist comes in Revelation chapter 6, when the Lamb is opening the 7 seals. And when he opens the first seal, this is what the Bible says. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. Now, this is an interesting thing because people spin all sorts of details and they assume that this is the Antichrist. This is one of the typical passages that are used to talk about the Antichrist, about how he will go out and conquer the world. And I've even heard it said that you can tell how he's going to conquer the world because he's given a bow, but he doesn't have any arrows. Seriously, I've heard that said. I've read that before. That's why people say that the Antichrist will be a man who preaches peace, because he's not armed in the book of Revelation. Now, I need to tell you guys a story about one of my professors in the seminary, a man named Dr. Jeffrey Gibbs. One time he was speaking to a pastor's conference, and he gave us this advice. He said that he tells his students this often in class, that when you're working with a biblical text, you should always keep one sound going in the back of your mind constantly. And that sound is this. And he said you should always do that as a constant reminder not to fart around with the text. And quite frankly, I think that the dispensational premillennialists have farted around with this text a little too much, especially when it comes to the bow and arrows. I mean, come on. I mean, if the guy has a bow, isn't it the logical conclusion to think that he has arrows? Let me put it to you this way. Suppose that one day I get mugged. I hope that never happens, but I fight off the mugger. Okay, I stand up for myself, I fight him off. My friends ask me later on why, and I explain that as I was walking through the park, this man jumped out in front of me with his hand in his pocket, and he told me that he had a gun. And so I attacked him and beat him off because he didn't say anything about having bullets. What do you think of that? Do you think that I should be commended for that leap in logic? No, of course not. If he says that he has a gun, the logical thing to assume is that he has bullets to go with it. And the same thing is true of the white horseman, the first horseman in the book of Revelation. But here's the other reason why that I think that this is not the Antichrist, is that the earliest church fathers, and there are three of them, that made commentaries on the book of Revelation. Those are Irenaeus, Victorinus, and some Greek name that I cannot pronounce right now. These three men actually thought that the first horseman was Jesus. And the reason why is because the horseman is on a white horse, the same way that Jesus is depicted later on in the book of Revelation. They made that connection and they said, well, it might be Christ. Which, is it? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't think so personally. Personally, I think that the first horseman is a representation of the human need to conquer, the sinful need to dominate other people and bring them under your heel. As a matter of fact, I think that's what all of the four horsemen are representations of human sin and how human beings treat one another. But that's another story for another day. Another place that I've heard that people see the Antichrist is, say, Revelation 12. They see the child that's born of the woman, and a few people wonder, maybe that's the Antichrist. That's been the subject of some movies in the past. My question is this: if that's the Antichrist, why is the dragon trying to kill him right away? Another place they look is Revelation 13, the beast that comes out of the sea. They say that's got to be the Antichrist, that powerful political figure who dies and then rises again in a fake resurrection, who does all that sort of a thing. My question for you is this, and this is sort of a pointed question, and I admit that it's a pointed question, but I have to ask it, is how can we know for sure what texts to stitch together? You remember what I said when we were talking about the man of lawlessness, that people take the 4 verses about the Antichrist and then they reach over into 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and they take those verses and stitch them together into the same person. Well, my question is this, just playing devil's advocate: how do we know that the man of lawlessness from Paul's letter and the Antichrist from John's letter are the same person? There is nowhere in the Bible that says that the Antichrist equals the man of lawlessness. Now, having said that, that's not what I believe. I do personally believe that they are one and the same person, but the question is, why do I believe that? Are we making a false assumption by trying to connect the idea of Antichrist with Revelation 13 or Revelation 12 or Revelation 6? How can we know for sure that we are getting it right? And that's a tricky question to ask for a couple of reasons. First of all is the fact that while the vocal minority is very sure of what the Antichrist is going to look like, a lot of other people disagree. For example, I am a Lutheran minister, and we Lutherans officially believe that the papacy is the Antichrist. That is what Martin Luther wrote, and by papacy I should clarify, I don't mean an individual person sitting on the throne in the Vatican City, although the fact that the current occupant of that chair bears a striking resemblance to a Sith Lord does give me a moment of pause. Not really, I'm just kidding. But the office itself, the office of the Pope, is the Antichrist. Now, I personally don't believe that myself. I have some historical issues with that it'd take too long to get into right now. Personally, I'm not so sure who or what the Antichrist is going to be, but I am fairly certain that the dispensational premillennialists, in their description of a charming and charismatic politician, probably are getting it wrong. For the same reason that we talked about 2 weeks ago. They have created a biography with no names. sort of like that chart with no dates, the map with no names that we talked about 2 weeks ago. They have gleaned so much data out of the Bible and pieced together a virtual biography of what they are sure the Antichrist is going to be, to the point that I wonder if they're a little too sure. I mean, think about it this way. The wise biblical scholars of Jesus' day and age were sure they knew what the Messiah was going to look like and be like when he got there. And then when Jesus showed up, they were so blinded by their own biography of what the Messiah should look like that they didn't recognize the Messiah when he was standing right in front of them. Could we have made the same mistake when it comes to the Antichrist? We get so wrapped up in thinking that we know what the Antichrist is going to be like that I worry that we're actually blinding ourselves. Besides, my question is this: if the Antichrist is supposed to deceive millions of people, why would he show up looking like Nikolai Carpathia from the Left Behind series? I mean, wouldn't that be a giveaway? And a pretty obvious one, too? So what do I believe about the Antichrist? Well, I believe a couple of things. First of all, I believe that he's going to arise from within the Christian church. I believe that's what St. Paul means in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 when he talks about how he sets himself up in the temple of God. Because if you look up the word temple and see how Paul uses it in his writings, 9 times out of 10 he uses it to refer to the Christian church as a whole, not to an actual physical building in Jerusalem. If you want me to, I can explain more about that in a future video. Just let me know in the comments. But in the meantime, that's the first step, is that it will not be a non-Christian. I believe that the Antichrist is going to pass himself off as a Christian, as a wise Christian, one who will lift himself up as being greater than God. And by doing so, he will deceive many, even our fellow Christians. And that's really about all that I know for sure, because I'm a little bit wary of nailing it down, so to speak. I think the best way to look at the Antichrist, if there can be a best way to look at the Antichrist, is a warning that there are going to be forces at work that oppose Christ and his church. It's happened throughout the generations, throughout the millennia. I mean, think about what John says in 1 John, that there's not just one Antichrist, but that there have been many Antichrists over the years. Nero, Domitian, Diocletian. We could probably list Hitler or Stalin or all these people who have risen up against God's church in one way, shape, or form. They have all been little a antichrists. The big A Antichrist will just be the worst of the bunch. It's a reminder that God's church will always face opposition, but the best news is that even when the big A Antichrist shows up, even if he unleashes hell upon Christ's church, he is doomed to fail. And that, my friends, is good news. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.